Hello guys, and welcome to the Final Fantasy VII comparison series. We're on part 8, which means we're talking about Aerith's backstory. Specifically, Aerith and Elmyra's backstory. So, this is going to be a downer, just letting you know right now. Like, this was really hard to read both times. There's a lot of sad stuff that happens, and a lot of sad memories. So, brace yourself for an emotional pummeling, and let's go ahead and start off. Alright, starting off with Gallagher's work as always. First off, we have the aftermath of the pillar assault. Let me tell you right now, the emotions of Barrett in this scene are captured perfectly, slowly transitioning from utter despair to a brief glimmer of hope, to frustration, sorrow, and finally anger. Gallagher takes his time, running through every line of dialogue, and bearing with it a new mood. There's a real fluidity to this emotional roller coaster of a scene. Now, in the contrast to this, there's a certain detachment from Cloud. He's busy pondering Aerith's word about the Ancients, and there's that brief, one-line cutaway, the flashback of the line uttered by Sephiroth. And in this scene, it's basically consuming his thoughts right now. He's not focusing on that loss. It's not even really, to him, very personal. But he knows that that's going to eventually play the bigger picture here. So, it's nice to see that he looks like he's completely heartless, and to an extent he is, but there's a purpose behind it. There's a certain calling, which again is kind of oddly foreshadowing. So they decide to head to Elmyra's place, naturally, and it's about time for our first quote. This is from page 131 and 132. Cloud found their trek across the broken freeway to pass much quicker than it had that morning, each distraught individual he saw restoring the sinister images of the terrible night that had changed his life 5 years before. Men and women called out longingly for their families, children for their parents. The anguished crowds had merged with the droves of curious onlookers, the inhabitants of the surrounding districts investigating the source of the quake that had stirred the foundations of their homes. A bustle of activity had commenced across the heavenless sky of the slums, and not unlike the commotion of the roads themselves. Aircraft of Shinra Inc.'s emergencies services soared beneath the plate, their searchlights illuminating the devastation in a hypocritical rescue attempt. Cloud was able to read Barrett's anger with ease as his brooding eyes tracked the helicopters. His dark features were laden with resentment for the audacity and deceit of President Shinra. In his own heart, he began to feel the desire to see it all end. The actions of the Shinra in Sector 7 had matched even the most nightmarish of his memories of the tragedy at Nibelheim. So again, we finally start to see Cloud showing a bit of emotion there. This is like 4 pages into the chapter, but he was focused on that one thing, but he's not completely heartless here. Now, this is a dialogue-heavy chapter, but Gallagher does weave in a lot of description in between, as you would expect, adding subtle layers to the character interactions. Early on in Elmyra's house, there's a little bit of a debate between Barrett and Elmyra, kind of like there is in the game. Barrett has been basically utterly defeated by recent events. His mind is a torrent of self-loathing, and when Elmyra expresses her disgust about Barrett leaving his child to go off and fight, he basically admits that he doubts himself and he doesn't know what else to do. It's a piteous scene, and it's really well done by Gallagher. He uses this as an opportunity to kind of peel back a bit of that tough exterior that we get from him. William's version, he's a bit more composed, he's a bit more confident. Gallagher really explores the vulnerability there. That said, I do find the line Elmyra says about Barrett being stuck in a vicious circle to be just a little bit on the nose. Usually Gallagher is a bit more subtle than that. And I understand why Elmyra is saying it. She's trying to show that she relates, and we're kind of getting a glimpse into her psyche here. But again, Gallagher generally has the ability to tell what people are feeling without using dialogue. It's weird. He can really play on the actions and play on the words that aren't said. So, just a little bit there. And I'll give you a perfect example of that. This is from page 134. And this is what I mean when I say he doesn't use words always to convey the emotions. Elmyra remained standing with her back to Cloud and Tifa at the dining table, lost in a daydream as she listened to Barrett's heavy footsteps on the strained floorboards above them. Marlene's cries of endless joy to be reunited with her father seemed to awaken her from her thoughts, the heart-warming sound refreshing amidst their current concerns. With a great effort to re-establish herself in the reality of the circumstances, she slowly joined the two, her body sagging as if she bore a great weight. It was more than a minute before Cloud spoke. It's shorter a quote than usual, but you see, that's what I'm talking about. That's more what I'm looking for. She doesn't utter a single word, and you can feel the sorrow and the connection that's been ripped from her. And he doesn't even mention it. That's what I'm talking about. He doesn't mention those words. He doesn't express that loss. You can feel it by the context of the scene. You immediately know, and any parent can immediately pick up on this, that bittersweetness of hearing a joyful reunion over your head. It's beautiful, but at the same time, it's like salt in the wound if you've lost your own kid. And I mean, it's not just parents, obviously. Most people can empathize with this situation. I just know that both Gallagher and I are fathers, and scenes like this used to be sad for me, but since I've had a kid, they become soul-crushing. Anyways, from here we move into the reminiscence scene with Elmyra explaining the story of how she met Aerith and Infalna. Here is a true test of a novelization, in my opinion. Taking a scene which, by its nature, has to have a long set of very precise dialogue cues present, and still managing to make it compelling and unique. If you just game script this, as I have done in the past, it'll be insufferable to read. But of course, both of these authors are experts at their craft. See, Gallagher sidesteps this by naturally leaning into his descriptors. I believe I called him a painter of words in the first part of this, and he does so here, giving us the full scene. You see, we've technically been this place before, Sector 7 train station, but he gives it a new energy. At first, we get that sense of disorientation, the hustle and bustle of the platform whipping about Elmyra as she hurries to greet the train, passers-by fading into and out of scene like the hundreds of strangers we meet every day. Right off the bat, we get an image and a feeling from this scene. Then comes the loneliness, the disappointment. Right after that, previous sorrow from the present day were carried right back into a moment in Elmyra's past where she felt the gap in her own heart, that sensation of missing and longing, no doubt triggered by the previous scene I mentioned. And sweet God, this chapter is a fucking downer. I'm serious. Okay. Anyways, it gets even worse next scene, because it's the scene where Elmyra meets the dying Infalna and the baby Aerith crying over her near-dead mom. Now, I normally don't give quotes because I want you to take in the craft of a full scene, but in this case, I'm doing it because I wouldn't make it through the damn thing. And I want to remind you people, I had to read through this battery of tragedy twice. In all seriousness, it's a very touching moment. Gallagher actually uses a feathered touch on the descriptors here, focusing more on the emotions of the moment than the surrounding environment. He actually does this all throughout the chapter, and it makes sense. We tend to recall memories less as a chronological series of events and more as a collection of feelings. There's a simple honesty to the way he writes these scenes. We move on to a young Aerith revealing the unfortunate news that Mr. Gainsborough has passed on. It's a scene I can never avoid making a Sixth Sense reference to whenever I see it. I see character development. Also, another reference to the compilation with the comment of the convoy lost to an explosion in the Tamblin Mountains. Just like to give nods to these when they're appropriate. Now, let's take a look at a quote from page 140, where Elmyra meets a teenage Tsung. Oh, lordy. The knock at the door startled her, causing her to spill a little of her coffee over the newspaper. Aerith giggled as Elmyra wrung the wet pages, dripping coffee splashing into her small saucer. She rose from the table, exchanging confused expressions with Aerith as the firm knock came a second time. Without haste, she crossed the room and opened the door slightly. A man in his late teens stood on the doorstep, his head jerking suddenly away from the flower pots on the window ledge as Elmyra appeared. He was a handsome young man, his pale complexion perfect but for a birthmark at the center of his forehead. His sleek black hair had been tied behind his head in a short ponytail, and he was clad in a formal black suit, straightening his crisp white shirt collar as he cleared his throat. Elmyra Gainsborough? He asked politely, holding out a hand. Yes? She replied suspiciously, making no effort to shake it. My name is Sung, he continued, unfazed, withdrawing his arm. I am an assistant to Chief Veld at Shinra Inc.'s Investigation Division of the General Affairs Department. I'm sorry, who? I get that a lot, smiled Sung. We are more commonly known as the Turks. Can I ask what you're doing here? Posed Elmyra. May I come in? He deflected. I would like to speak with you and your daughter. Very well, said Elmyra hesitantly, holding the door open for him to pass. He thanked her, wiping his polished shoes on the mat before entering the living space. Aerith glared at him, as if in an immediate recognition, dropping her dolls to the floor as she backed towards Elmyra. Whew. Just the way the energy drains from that moment is almost palpable. Like, seriously, getting a call from the Turks is almost as bad as missionaries showing up, am I right? I grew up Mormon, I'm allowed to make those jokes, it's okay. The dialogue between Sung and Aerith in the following page has this unsettling, predatory nature to it. We see Aerith denying her heritage because she doesn't want to lose her mother and be taken away by this creeper, and Sung just keeps on smiling. It's so unwholesome, and I love it. And I feel there's a deeper commentary here about authority figures and their treatment of kids, but let's not get too controversial here. More compilation history follows, with Elmyra detailing some events from before Crisis. I never played, and I don't really know the details that well, but it's obviously that's what's being referenced. And then, of course, we get a reference to Zack again, although not by name. Excellent backstory and compilation references here. Okay, so finally, Barrett comes down and resolves to go find and help Aerith. The party essentially picks itself back up and prepares to storm Shinra Inc. Whew. Alrighty then. Well, let's brace ourselves for William's take on this situation. So, first off, we're going to be going through chapters 22, 23, and a couple of pages into 24. He actually devotes a decent amount of time to this. Haven't had to do the partial chapter thing in a while, but it relates to how Williams writes his reminiscences as their own chapter. So naturally, this is going to be interesting to see the scene from first person. Now, to be fair, chapter 22 is like 2 pages long. It mostly covers that initial shock and then making their way to Elmyra's place. One thing about the Barrett scene, we don't quite get a roller coaster of emotion. It's more like a subway, stopping at a few of the local hotspots around your emotional psyche. Attention passengers, the stop is a suppressed rage. Please stay back from the yellow line, doors closing. That was tortured. Anyways, he shows the results of the emotion that Barrett is feeling, but he doesn't really delve into them that much. On the one hand, he's not spoon-feeding us. We can tell from the actions that Barrett is upset. There is a little bit of that Gallagher-esque quality, where he's not using direct descriptions to convey emotion, but at the same time, seeing these beautifully crafted paragraphs dedicated to Barrett's rage shooting at the rubble feels a little bit hollow, considering we don't really get an emotional descriptor all that much. It's not completely devoid of emotion by any means, but it feels like it leans a bit too much on the reader to fill in the gap, especially in between the varying states of Barrett's psyche. Again, I really hate to criticize, but I think Gallagher's version flowed just a little bit better here. Now, both Williams and Gallagher give us a few paragraphs about the Shinra army moving in to deal with the mess, like I mentioned in the previous quote from Gallagher's page. But it's over as soon as it's begun, and we've moved on to the real focus of this part. Williams adds his usual bit of world building to create that sort of uneasy presence, as if the heroes are like characters in Final Destination who shouldn't be alive. I particularly like that he adds information from a marquee reading off the local Shinra news ticker. Both authors use the image of circling helicopters to great effect too, but Williams adds in a commentary about the wreckage being shown on TV with heli-mounted cameras. There's such a scummy sensationalism to it. Let me read you here from page 181. Sector 5 was just as crowded as the evening before, but no one was moving. The streets were full of people standing still. They approached from the main road. Some of the people were talking, some were crying. Most were standing in the street with their shocked faces upturned, glued to the jumbotron. The footage was from helicopters, which circled above the plate. searchlights cast down in a black and red pit of fire and tar. The Jumbotron displayed several live cameras at once, one of them focused on the bodies. Beneath the images, the text scrolled by. Thanks to Shinra Emergency Response... Ethtoll passes 2 million mark... Sources, it is believed that the terrorist activities of the group Tifa took hold of Barrett's hand. Cloud patted him on the back. They weaved through the crowd without difficulty. They were the only people moving. They passed the pipe that the sick man stayed in. Still empty. So chapter 22 ends just as they arrive at Elmyra's house, but before they've even made it inside. This creates an odd sort of narrative disconnect, as Elmyra's reminiscence of the chapter, at first glance, seems almost without context. But, that said, chapter 23 is without a doubt some of Williams' best writing in the book. I know I just gave you a quote like 2 seconds ago, but I really want you to see how he delves right into Elmyra's character again with the opening page of this chapter. Here is the entirety of page 183 for you. I don't remember the lesson I gave. It was 15 years ago, and even if I could remember, it wouldn't be relevant anymore. History is cyclical, and the same mistakes appear again and again. I tend to favor the modern examples so that people may better understand. One of my students, a bright girl by the name of Eunice, stayed after to help me fold the chairs. The mailman came as Eunice prepared to leave. We still had a mailman back then. What an odd concept today. Somebody who just comes to your house and drops your mail in front of your door, out in the open where anyone can take it. I sorted the mail over my afternoon tea. It fell out of a handful of thank you cards sent by my students and baby shower invitations sent by my old school chums. The letter had my name machine printed on the envelope. Back then, you didn't see that kind of thing often. The return address was just the Shinra Diamond, a crimson blotch on the page. I didn't want to open it. History gives you strange new perspectives on communal truth. Some details can be fudged without too much hassle in the grand scheme of things, which is an excellent case for denial. What happened to Sector 7 will be burned into our collective memory. We'll mark it every year if we survive that long. That feeling is history. Just as we all remember where we were when we heard that Sephiroth had died. It's that feeling of absolute certainty when we know that we are trapped in the truth and the denial dies. As long as our lives last, we shall know it. God damn, talk about opening up a chapter. There's so much going on in that reminiscence in just that first page. And the way he connects the memory of the past to the Sector 7 incident, tying up that initial what's going on moment. And again, Williams is not shy about some political commentary, or maybe I'm just reaching too much here, but the line about remembering it every year certainly calls to mind a lot of recent tragedies is the word I was going for there. Whatever. I also commented, now I need to put this down, this is off script, but I also just realized he mentions in the interview he did with me a while ago, a few years back, that he deals with a lot of subjective truth. The game, Final Fantasy VII, deals with the idea of subjective truth, subjective recollections. And we get a little bit of foreshadowing that here with the line about strange new perspectives on communal truth. There's, again, a lot going on here. It's really good. So of note in this initial section is William's name for Mr. Gainsborough, Sergeant Philip Gainsborough. He spells it with one I, which is the way Philip DeFranco spells it, Mr. Williams. Are you DeFranco Nation by any chance? Generally, Williams takes his time with these scenes a little bit more than Gallagher did. He expresses the growing hopelessness in Elmyra over time, days and weeks passing as Elmyra keeps going to the train station and keeps being disappointed. You see, this is what I was expecting with the Barrett scene, and it's one of the key strengths of writing these reminiscences in first person. There's an inherent there's an inherent intimacy that comes with writing in the first person, and it allows for that immediate emotional connection with the reader. Now, writing in first person poorly can be disastrous, but if done right, and Williams has always done so in my opinion, it creates that link in our minds. Hearing something from a narrator is never going to be as personal as hearing it directly from a character. And that's what Williams takes full advantage of. It's an illusion, but it's a damn good illusion. when she talks about her waning hope, the growing conflicting emotions, about not wanting to know what happened, but also not wanting to be disappointed when she finds out the truth, we feel for her, the character of Elmyra. There's a line talking about Elmyra's youth here, by the way, another example of the extra world building we get, where a young Elmyra utters a dare-worthy line, "I'm high on hope, not dope." As a 90s kid who swallowed that tripe, let me tell ya, this actually struck a chord with me. Anybody else take those programs as a kid? Hashtag legalize it. But why mention drugs? Because of this sentence, which is absolutely brilliant. I love it. This is like the key sentence of this book. I can't put it. I can't describe it any better than that. This is my favorite sentence in this entire book. Like all drugs, hope has a hard come down. That sentence is such an amazing phrase and relates to this world so well. It is a microcosm of the plight of the people of Midgar. The scene with meeting Ifalna and Aerith has a sort of mundanity to it. Williams even calls this out. He mentions a line from the game, "You see this stuff all the time in the war." Gallagher mentions it too, but Williams has truly constructed a world up to this point where it really feels believable. In Gallagher's Midgar, a woman dying with her child is still a sad, horrific affair. In Williams' Midgar, it's like, yep, she dead. A nice character segment occurs here. Tiny Aerith is scared of taking a bath because she spent her life in a laboratory, probably in those horrible storage tubes. Such a subtle moment here, and one that makes perfect sense. Now, interestingly, the scenes that were actually in the game go by a wee bit quicker, but with no less love. Williams does include a scene here where Aerith heals Elmyra, using some picked-up restore materia, displaying her natural healing prowess, and she uses it with no concern whatsoever. It's a nice little scene. There's a little childlike innocence to it, where Aerith is confused by anybody being scared of magic. The end of this reminiscence actually gives us a scene where Aerith leaves Marlene off at Sector 5 after she's been kidnapped. Again, part of the reason why Williams' version is so interesting to read as an experienced player of the game. We don't get to see the scene play out, so Williams shakes things up. He doesn't tell, he shows. We even get a teary goodbye to close the section out. It's bittersweet and the heartbreak is palpable. Again, feeling the loss of the child is hard on this big softy of a dad, but actually reading it play out in the first person was legitimately a little bit hard for me. Seriously, chapter 23 is so goddamn good. I want you all to read his book. I want you to read both their books. But I really want you to read this chapter specifically. If nothing else, it works fine as a one-shot fiction. It's some of the best writing I've ever read. I mean, they're both amazing authors, but Williams, that's your top point of this book by far. Now, I wish I could end there, but there are a few pages of chapter 24 to get through to catch us up. Again, Williams doesn't handhold. They're sipping tea in Elmyra's living room when the chapter opens, and she is wrapping up her story. This time, though, it's actually forgivable because it's not such of a jump. Obviously, they were there. We didn't need to repeat any info in this chapter, and it allows for some really good pacing. We have the long, somber reminiscence chapter, and then when chapter 24 starts up, we're right back in the action. In fact, there's a bit of a combative moment between Elmyra and Cloud, and let's face it, they've been screwed over before. Let me read you from page 195 here. "So," Elmyra said, "she followed you?" Cloud saw a green materia on a shelf mantel where last night there had been none. "Yes, she followed me," he said. "She's hard to control, I bet. No wonder Shinra had a hard time holding on to her." "That isn't funny." Cloud decided against apologizing. "If you're thinking of selling us out, don't bother. Shinra's made of lies. They would never return Aerith to you." "Well now," Elmyra put her hands on her hips, "unless you are offering me another option, I really don't care what you think." "Here's one." Cloud turned to leave. "I'm going to get her." Again, there's that slum saltiness from Elmyra that I love in Williams' version. There's other few cute nods here, one referencing disguising Marlene as a former student of Elmyra's, the one mentioned at the beginning here, Eunice. A little moment between Marlene and Cloud, oddly enough, but they're pretty quick, and compared to the rest of the section, not terribly noteworthy. But I still like them, so I just wanted to give them a tiny shout-out here. And that catches us up with Williams' version. So, what's the conclusion here? Well, you can probably interpret my main point easily enough. It's about how each author handles sorrow and grief. Williams has a distinct advantage here on this one, and I actually think his version was a little bit stronger when it came to Elmyra's recounting. Part of that is due to the inherent connection he forges by writing those scenes in the first person, but to say that that's all that it is would be way too reductive. He really lays out the entire backstory of this character and takes his time. With Gallagher's version, we don't know Elmyra as well. We still know her well enough, and we still feel sorry for her plight. And there's absolutely no question he handles Barrett's emotions far better. But with the benefit of the time and energy that Williams devotes to developing Elmyra within that chapter, when the sad thing happens, as I said before, we don't just feel sorry for Aerith's mom. We feel sorry for her, Elmyra. We feel sorry for the character that he's created. And the thing is, the extra time could have resulted in a pacing hiccup, but it really doesn't. He handled himself very well here. As I've said before, Chapter 23 is among the best writing in the book. It's some of the best things Williams has ever written, in my opinion. It is probably my favorite chapter so far. And I don't mean to dismiss Gallagher's work at all. I know I sound like I'm lording on the praise to Williams' version here. Gallagher's version still absolutely nails the scene, and the pacing is solid all the way through it. But I have to give some credit where it's due, so well done, Williams. You did a great job. So next time, we'll be looking at the first part of the Shinra Tower infiltration, from our golden shiny wire of hope right up to the conference room meeting. That entire section is going to be broken into about 4 parts, which will bring us to the end of Gallagher's book. There is a little stuff after there, the Nibelheim Incident sub-book, if you will. But to be honest, I'm probably going to end it there, because that is also where when they leave Midgar, that is where Williams' book ends. And I feel like that's probably better than throwing in a little bit of Xander's second book. Because the Nibelheim Incident within the book of A New Threat is kind of a sub-book, as I mentioned. And it's still there. I'm still going to read it, of course. But I'm also currently reviewing the other A Nibelheim Incident, so it's a little bit weird. Let me know what you think, particularly the 2 authors here. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I might change my mind. But I'm thinking about wrapping it up there just to have a nice, neat little package on even footing. So, now it's time to briefly talk about the Nibelheim Incident. Chapters 4 and 5. Now, Chapter 4 starts us off with Tifa's perspective. Now, we've been really getting the whole platter of characters in these early chapters. It begins with her chasing her pet cat named Mog, both a nice reference and a relatable scene. I feel like Tifa could have saved herself the trouble, frankly. Any cat owner will tell you the best way to get a cat to come back to you is to try and eat food, or work on a computer, or lay down anywhere. Gallagher references Tifa's previous accident, the one from the flashback where she nearly died as a kid. It's effective because in the same scene where Gallagher demonstrates that Tifa can look out for herself, he also references a point where she was at her most vulnerable. This is key for later. And speaking of vulnerable, a Deathclaw shows up to ruin her day and scare the hell out of her cat. We get a great moment where Tifa decides to rise up to this challenge on one level, but is also experiencing repressed panic. It's a great rookie fighter scene. She's still learning, and now she's facing something that is way out of her league. A solid few paragraphs of doubt build up in her before she is saved by the shotgun-wielding Heidi. Tifa repays the favor by having some banter with the woman, before revealing that there is a secret ropeway accessible to Shinra employees. The thing is a battered-looking death trap, but hey, it's still better than Delta Airlines. During this ride, Tifa brings up Cloud, and Heidi admits that she knows about him. They went on a mission together. There's actually a lot going on in the scene. This is Tifa before her absolute undying hatred of Shinra, a time when her friend is, in her mind, a proud, up-and-coming soldier, a time when Nibelheim is pretty well treated by the members of Shinra, for the most part, out of necessity. This is the kind of experience that, for us, the reader, is full of that dramatic irony. We know what's going to happen, and so the writing has a sort of odd presence to it. It's a calm before the storm. The chapter ends with a flashback to the Promise scene at the water tower. It's a nice retelling of it too, but I want to draw attention to the artwork from Crimson Sun, because I have barely mentioned it up to this point. While this is an analysis of the writing primarily, to not deep dive into the art would be to leave out a massive chunk of its appeal. All of the art here has been spectacular, but I particularly loved this one. I wish I was better at describing visual art, but the full-page picture depicting the promise scene is just astonishing. The black and white colors somehow make the night sky pop and give a realness to the wooden texture of the water tower. Our two heroes are actually fairly minimalist in their design, and were it not for the spiky hair of Cloud, could almost be any two youngsters enjoying a beautiful evening rendezvous. It's just a powerful bit of art, and I really enjoy it. Krim did amazing. Anyways, Chapter 5, meanwhile, takes us into Cloud's perspective, again continuing the buffet of players. So we get a glimpse of Shinra Infantryman Cloud, as he reflects on his previous assignment, the escort job and the Nibelheim Incident. Again, references to the compilation. Cloud continues to doubt himself, to doubt his strength, so he starts as he means to go on, and even begins to wonder whether or not the failures of the previous missions were his fault. I guess technically yes, because he's a protagonist. But no, seriously, it's a good look at who Cloud is. When we're in FF7, we're seeing this strange hybrid persona, the fusing of Cloud and Zack. We're seeing native Cloud in this chapter. This is the Cloud who says, come on guys, let's mosey. He's weak, he's scared, he's a kid. It's a complete 180 of the stoic and confident badass we see in, for instance, A New Threat. So then we get some name drops here. Red and Laguna, Security Division volunteers. I'm guessing Red is semi-canonical, or if not, it's an implication that this is Red 1. Hell, Red Leader, if you want to go for the Star Wars reference. Laguna, on the other hand, is a secondary protagonist from FF8. I'm guessing that was just an Easter egg you threw in. I don't know for certain. Gallagher did say that after 7, 8 is probably his favorite FF, so it's a nice touch. They also mentioned that time they had to escort a rowdy, dark-skinned giant. Gee, I wonder who that's a reference to. It's Barrett. They're referencing Barrett. It's a nice touch. I like it. And we also see Kunsel in the crowd here, and get some references to the rivalry between the branches of Shinra. Again, I like that. I like to see some of the inner tension, because Shinra is not a very loyalty-inspiring place to work for. There's also a little bit where Cloud muses about how different his life is from Rufus Shinra. They're both teenagers, and yet he doesn't live at all like him or his schoolboy chums from Nibelheim, most of whom he got into fights with, as he points out. Again, there's that little bit of reflection and good character development. This is all these chapters have been basically setting up our players before the main course happens, the Act 2, if you will. And this entire chapter is just building up to Zack and Cloud joining forces and gearing up to head into Nibelheim. We get to see Cloud's perspective of Zack and see a little bit of their budding brotherhood, the country boys and all that. And when Sephiroth shows up and announces their destination, Nibelheim, it's all too much for Cloud. Not only is he meeting his hero Sephiroth, but he's also, as the chapter ominously announces at its conclusion, going home. Wow, this was long. So, wrapping things up here, because this has been 33 minutes, my god, and I trimmed some. Okay, thank you guys for listening, and we'll be at the beginning of the end next time. So we will see y'all later.